a Voronoi diagram question which turns into hypothesis testing. This is for paper 2. So the following grid shows a restaurant's floor plan. There are 4 food stations centered at points P, Q, R, and S. The Voronoi diagram for these 4 points is shown. Point Q is not shown. 1 unit represents 1 meter. Point P is located at 2, 2. The equation of the perpendicular bisector of PQ is y equals 4. Write down the coordinates of Q. Okay, first thing we need to look at is this part here. The equation the equation of PQ, bisector of PQ, is y equals 4. That's important because it means it is a directly horizontal bisector. So on the flip side of that, it means that P and Q are going to be in the same plane vertically. So if they're in the same plane vertically, it means they're going to have the same x value. So the x value of Q is also going to be 2. So down here, I know it's 2. I also know that they are going to be equally distance away from the bisector. So point P here is 2 units away from the bisector. So Q is going to be 2 units vertically away from the bisector as well. So it's going to occur at the coordinate 2, 6. 1 mark you get for the correct coordinate. Next one. Point R and S are located at 11, 0 and 12, 6 respectively. So let's have a look. S and R just up there. Find the coordinates of the midpoint. Okay, this part over here, which I'm drawing an arrow to, is not given in the question. This is taken from the formula booklet. So we are looking for the midpoint. So we need to use the second equation down there. So I'm going to just label, this can be x1, y1, x2, y2. Sub in our points. So x1 is 11 plus x2 is 12. Divide that by 2. The y values, 0 plus 6 divided by 2. This is going to simplify down to 11 plus 12 is 23. 23 divided by 2 is 11.5. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that means that the midpoint of R and S up here, this midpoint, is at the coordinate 11.53. Next, the equation of the perpendicular bisector of RS. Give your answer in the form y equals mx plus c. So if I go back to my diagram for a second, we are trying to find the equation of this line here. We have just figured out that the midpoint, we've just figured out the coordinates of the midpoint rather. If I can work out the gradient between S and R, then I can use the fact that m1 times m2 is -1. This is for perpendicular lines, and I can figure out the gradient of the bisector. Then I can sub in my midpoint, which I just found, and I can work out the C value of the bisector. So that is, in theory, what we are going to do. So step 1 is find the gradient, and we can say the gradient between R and S. So the gradient is going to be rise over run. So the difference between the y values is going to be 6 minus 0 divided by 12 minus 11. So 6 minus 0 is 6, 12 minus 11 is 1, 6 over 1 is just 6. So that is the gradient of R and S. Step 2, we want to find M2, which is the gradient of the bisector. So M1 times M2 equals -1. This is for perpendicular lines. M1 is 6, so 6 times M2 equals -1. So M2 equals -1 over 6. That is the gradient of the bisector. Step 3, we've got for the bisector y equals -1 over 6 x plus c. We're going to sub the midpoint, which is 11.53, into that equation that I just wrote above. So now we're going to have, instead of y, we've got 3 equals -1 over 6 times 11.5 plus c. We're going to solve it for c. So I'm going to have -1 on my calculator over 6 is that number times that by 11.5, and we get that number. So let's keep it as a fraction. So -23 over 12 plus c, all of that equals 3. So the opposite of minus 23 over 12 is plus 23 over 12. So we're going to do 3 plus 23 over 12 equals 59 over 12. So C equals 59 over 12. Final step, let's do it just up here. Final step is to actually state what the bisector equation is. So this is for the bisector of RS. We are going to have y equals -1 over 6 x plus c, which we just figured out was 59 over 12. Okay, multiple steps to that. So that one is worth 4 marks. Next, customers in the restaurant take their food from the nearest food station. The following table shows the average waiting time in minutes for each food station. So if you're getting food from P, you're waiting 8 minutes. From Q, you're waiting 4. From R, you're waiting 9. And from S, you're waiting 6 minutes on average. Using the nearest neighbor interpolation, find the average waiting time for a customer at the point 68. So back to the diagram, the point 68 is going to be up here. That coordinate that I just wrote in, that is 68. 68 is closest to Q. So back down here, 68 is closest to Q. That means that the average waiting time is going to be 4 minutes. So we could say nearest to Q, therefore 4 minutes, let's say average on average. Okay, that one's only worth 1 mark, so you get a point for saying it's closest to Q, so 4 minutes. Next, the restaurant owner wishes to determine whether customers spend more money during the weekend. She decides to use a two sample t-test at a 5% level of significance. For this test, the null hypothesis is, so H0 is the null hypothesis, U1 equals U2, where U1 is the mean amount of money spent by all customers on weekdays, and U2 is the mean amount of money spent by all customers on weekends. State the alternative hypothesis. Okay, you need to be specific with this, so I've taken this directly from the marking scheme. Either, if you said U1 is less than U2, that would give you the 1 mark. Over here, it's worth 1 mark. Or if you wanted to write it in words, you need to be specific with the wording. So down here, you could say, or the mean amount of money spent by all customers on weekdays is less than the mean amount of money spent by all customers on weekends. The specificity of the wording there is important. Down here, I've said, this is again from the marking guide, you would get 0 marks for saying the sample mean, or if you don't say the mean at all, like as in the mean is omitted, you would get 0 marks. So for example, if your answer was money spent on weekdays is less than money spent on weekends, you would get 0 marks. So you could either say this top line, which is probably the easiest to remember because then you don't have to stuff around with the wording, or you could say that one there, number 2. You cannot say this last one and get a mark for it. So be just careful of that. Next, the owner considers collecting her sample data from 2 weekdays and 1 weekend by recording the amount spent on the first 12 orders on each of these days. State which one of the following methods best describes the owner's planned sampling, either convenience, systematic, or stratified. Again, I wanted to be specific with the marking guide here. So the correct answer is convenience. And for reference, down here, I've said that convenience is selected from a group that is easy to reach. Systematic is selected at a fixed sampling interval, for example, every 20th customer. And stratified, which was the last option, is selecting a random sample where numbers in certain categories are proportional to their numbers in the population. So of those 3 options, convenience is the most likely or the best representation of the situation that we've got. That's worth 1 mark. Last last 2 questions. It says state 1 disadvantage of this sampling technique. Again, I wanted to be specific. So the correct answer is that it's not representative of the whole population. A convenience sample, or this sample, not representative of the whole population. If you said any of these down here, these are not acceptable for the 1 mark. So if you said disadvantages of other sampling methods, so let's say in the previous question you thought it was systematic, and you went on to say why systematic sampling is not great, you don't get a mark for that. If you said there are 5 days during the week and only 2 on a weekend, that wouldn't give you a mark. Anything based on speculation or information that's not presented in the question. If you said people spend different amounts of money, or if you said that this is a sample, so it doesn't collect every data point, and that more data should have been collected. That last one is a very common response. So the only correct response here is that it is not representative of the entire population. Last question. It says the restaurant owner instead collects the data using simple random sampling. The p-value is 0.0897 for the sampled data. State the conclusion for the test and justify your answer. So the p-value is larger than 0.05. Where is the 0.05 coming from? It comes from back up here where it said up here it says a 5% level of significance. So if I go back down, the p-value of 0.08 is larger than 0.05. Therefore, we accept the null hypothesis. That one is worth 2 marks. So you get a mark for the inequality. So this top line here, you get a mark for that. And then you also get a mark for saying accept the null hypothesis. You can't get a mark if you said that you need to accept the null hypothesis, but if you didn't state one of these top 2, you would get 0 marks out of 2 for that. Now, for reference, If the chi-squared, which we don't have, but I'm just saying this is for reference, if the chi-squared is greater than the critical value, or if the p-value is less than the significance level, we reject the null hypothesis. You need to remember this. In our case, the p-value is larger than the significance level, so we accept the null hypothesis. In a different situation, you would need to remember these down here and then make a conclusion.